I mean, I could end the video right here. This is perfect. But alright, let me tell you about Wonderlands. After the release of Borderlands 3, fans, myself included, were expecting Gearbox to end the set of DLC with another adventure set in the world of Bunker and Badasses, similar to the final DLC of Borderlands 2, and unfortunately, we didn't get that. We did however get a DLC focused on Krieg, which was pretty good, but what I never expected to see was a spin-off that's not only good, but a massive step up in quality. Wonderlands is a spin-off set in the world of Bunker and Badasses, a tabletop game that was made canon in Borderlands 2 and the Assault of Dragon's Keep DLC. To cut a long story short, this is a parody of Dungeons & Dragons. While it doesn't directly play out like a D&D session because you're still playing an FPS game, it does contain a few points of reference from the original source. For example, in Wonderlands you can make your own character, unlike the previous Borderlands titles where you'd have a selection of 4 Vault Hunters to choose from. Wonderlands lets you create your own character known as a Fate Maker. From the voice to the class, this is your hero. You can make them how you want, or at least over time you will. As at first this feels very limited, following the tradition of Borderlands where most of the cosmetic items are locked until you find them in an item drop. So it didn't really wow me at much first, but my friend sent me this unholy figure, so you might be able to achieve that true hero material. As for the classes, it works a little different in Wonderlands. Normally in Borderlands you'd have a set of different skill trees for each character which you can then pick and choose from as you level up throughout the game. But with Wonderlands, each class only has a single tree, and at the start you'll have a main class to choose from and an optional secondary class you can pick later on. There's a few different ones like a Stabbermancer who focuses on critical hits, or the Graveborn which focuses on dark magic and has a little floating skull as a companion.
I am now accepting applications to be my servant. Inquire at the Tomb of Perpetual Suffering.
And can you guess which class I went with? And outside of the floating skeleton friend, I love this class. Graveborn has a focus on dark magic which is pretty cool on its own. Not only is it stupidly strong, but it has an extra attribute that allows you to leech life from your enemies. And with the mix of the spell shot class, I was pretty much using a mix of magic to regain my health and shields immediately, and I just felt like a god. Now, the core gameplay of Wonderlands will appear pretty familiar to anyone who's played the previous games, as this is pretty much just a looter shooter, except with the additional things like melee weapons and more importantly spells. This is a fantasy game overall, so instead of using grenades you'll have a bunch of different spells that you can find throughout the game. Some basics like shooting lightning from your hands, and then others which are more extreme like summoning a meteorite to crash into your enemies. At first when I saw the melee system I wasn't entirely thrilled by it. It seems a bit slow and clunky at points, pretty much the melee system from 3, but you can swap your weapons for different stats, and towards the end I found myself using it more frequently once I found some dark magic weapons. And again, the spells have just ruined me. I love these things. They're such a joy to use and incredibly satisfying when you clear out a group of enemies.
At last, another voice. The fire of life.
The gunplay is pretty similar to Borderlands 3, in fact a lot of the weapons are just from 3 with different names. They don't really expand the armory that much, but with certain weapons they've changed little things like how most pistols look like a crossbow hybrid, and some snipers are basically a harpoon gun. So it definitely feels similar, but it still feels good either way. What was a nice change however is that the balancing in this game is a lot better than it was in 3. One of my biggest issues towards the end of the game's life in Borderlands 3 was how forgiving the drops were. In Wonderlands it took me a few hours to actually see my first legendary, but in Borderlands 3 I started a run once and by the time I left Pandora I had a full set of legendary equipment. And half of those legendaries were pretty crap. And the main reason why I couldn't get any legendary weapons at the start of the game is because you need to increase your luck, and you can only do this by picking up loot dice that are around the map. Now I might have an unpopular opinion here, but I think this is a much better way to ease you into the gameplay of Wonderlands. I like Borderlands 3, it's probably the best in certain aspects when it comes to the weapons and environments, but the game does come with some caveats. There's stuff like the wasted potential of main villains, the underwhelming twist, the overall story being about Twitch streamers, the chore of going back to Sanctuary to talk to Liv after what felt like every other mission, and the level of jokes and writing in Borderlands 3 were pretty terrible.
I've had a lot of free time since you crashed us here, Balix. Do Did you know the local jabbers have a unique language just for mating? They're quite the romantics.
I get it. I'm no good at dirty talk. Shut up about it.
You want to hear some? It's really beautiful. Ooh, ooh, ah, ah, ee, ee, wah, you, ah, 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 ooh, ooh.
Oh, crap! She's calling all the horny jabbers back to us. I hate them things.
And to my surprise, Wonderlands did the unthinkable and made a story that's not only good, but has decent writing. The story is about a villain named Dragonlord who wants to take over the Wonderlands for himself, and you're the only person who can stop him as you're the fabled Fate Maker. Throughout the adventure you'll be accompanied by Tina, who is obviously the Bunker Master, and then two new characters to the Borderlands universe, Fret and Valentine. Fret is a cool robot and Valentine is just your typical dumb hero. They don't really exist in-game, but they give you exposition and advice as Tina assigns them to be your advisors. Imagine Kronk's Angel and Devil from Emperor's New Groove. It's kinda like that, but at times they'll give you different options to different scenarios. Like, for example, at one point you have to stop a wizard who's harassing some goblins, and you can either go with Fret's idea of intimidation, or you can go with Valentine's suggestion and attempt to seduce him, which you can imagine goes as well as you think.
Wow! You are so handsome. Look at the way your posterior pops. I would love to get my hands on that posterior.
Oh, not this again. Curse these good looks.
Also, at one point, you just seduce a bridge. You can do that. And I don't really know how to feel about it.
Bridge to the inner walls has been raised. You're stuck on this side. What do you think?
I think it's obvious. He seduced the drawbridge.
Hello there. Couldn't help but notice your reinforced beams from across the moat.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna make you roll for that. The drawbridge, it takes your flavor, baby.
Works every time.
I think one aspect of the story in Wonderlands I enjoyed the most was how, in a weird way, the plot likes to break the fourth wall ever so slightly. It doesn't direct anything at you as the player, but more the player of the Fate Maker, who's in the Borderlands universe. So it's a little bit weird to explain. Basically, at points the villain just goes, nah, I'm sick of this, I want to do things my way, and then takes control away from Tina, giving this weird vibe that B&B is a lot more than a tabletop game, which I weirdly like. Another thing I was weirdly happy with towards the end of the game was how they dealt with the open world. Normally in Borderlands the maps are quite big and you normally have a vehicle to traverse around in, but you don't have vehicles in Wonderlands. Wonderlands has kind of gone with making the maps a bit more compact, so you still have to walk around some areas to do things, but there's less empty space. So instead of what we have in Borderlands where you travel across the desert, if you want to get from one area to another, you would actually have to explore the overworld, which outside of having giant heads, it's a weirdly good idea for this game. You do have things to do in this overworld like knocking down bottle caps for bridges, taking on side quests, rebuilding shrines to get passive boosts for the rest of the game, and also you have an enemy encounter which if they walk up to you they then proceed into a battle scenario. Obviously it doesn't play like an RPG, it plays like Borderlands, but if you don't want to deal with it, you can just punch them.
These were the questions asked by Nulliferbia.
You'll also see as well around the game things like temples and camps that you can go into and clear out, and these are pretty much just a tiny arena where you have to kill all the enemies to get a reward. And if you're doing all of this in the overworld alongside the side quests, this can feel a little repetitive, but they're pretty short so it's not all bad. Something I was surprised to see though was the amount of optional areas you could go through in this game for more missions. It's not uncommon for a Borderlands game to have an extra area that has no relevance to the main story, but it's normally just one area with like 1 or 2 little missions. Wonderlands has about 4 of these areas and each additional area has its own little story going on inside it, with a few side quests in each. For example, in one of them you help goblins overthrow their masters, then you go elsewhere to nearly cause the end of the world, another one you become a pirate lawyer, and then in my favourite you almost destroy a town with a magic bean. And not only does this area feature a giant skeleton boss which is beyond amazing, but it also features a side quest that has probably one of my favourite bits of continuity where a guy jumps off the edge of the map and once you return to the overworld you can find his corpse and mug him. Oh, that's such a great... And it was after mugging this dead corpse that something dawned on me. This is the first time ever in a Borderlands game where I've never really had to return to the hub area for the main story. Once you leave Brighthoof, you technically don't ever have to go back there until the end of the game. This is obviously if you don't care about side quests, upgrading your total ammo or vanity, but other than that, there's no reason to return here. Yes, clearly at points you will return here for some reason, but it's never because of the main quest. It's not like in Borderlands 3 where you have Lilith in your ear every 10 minutes going, "Hey killer, return back to the ship so you can reflect on what you just did." Just to go straight back into the area you're already at. At best, you're most likely going to be spending most of your time in the hub world once you beat the game, because that's when the post-game, and yes, you heard me correctly, there is a post-game, kicks in. Upon beating the game, you'll unlock a few extra things like the means to swap out your secondary skill to another, the blacksmith can now re-roll additional stats on enchanted weapons, and if you're like me and spent most of your time doing all the side quests during your first playthrough, that might sound a bit pointless. However, after you beat the game, you're invited into the castle where you can discover the Chaos Chamber. This Chaos Chamber is an area deep within the castle that contains some of the more extreme ideas that Tina's made over the years, and this is where you can jump in and take them on. Within these runs you'll be provided with things to buff yourself like passive upgrades, whether it's consumables you use by buying rainbow stones, or at the end of each round you're given an option to choose a buff that comes at a price. For example, get a huge buff on elemental damage, but make enemies immune to specific elements, and when they die they explode. So in a way, Wonderlands has a bit of a roguelike game mode that's hidden away as a final reward for people who enjoy the grind and want to get the best loot, and I have no real complaints about it. I think this is a brilliant idea. Sure, I'll admit that I'd love to have seen Mr. Bones the Undefeated as a post-game impossible side quest, but this is a great idea for people who are invested in the game. I hope alongside future DLC they invest more into creating new arenas and enemies for this mode, as I think is a lot of fun. But honestly, all I can think at the moment is how much this game has surprised me, because at its core, it is still just a Borderlands game, but it felt like a fresh start for the franchise. I'm dead excited for what's in store for the future of this game or possible franchise that Wonderlands could have, and I'd definitely love to see the game get a sequel, but also I want to see what they're going to do with the future DLCs. There is a lot of room for creativity in how each DLC can play out, similar to how in the third DLC in Borderlands 3 they attempted to go with different storytelling, and in my opinion I thought it worked. Wonderlands is a superb game and I love it to bits. I honestly think this was the best direction Gearbox could have taken it after 3. I would easily recommend this game to anyone, even if you're not interested in Borderlands. I think Wonderlands holds up on its own. Sadly for PC, the game is only on Epic at the moment with a Steam release down the line, and the only reason I'm playing it on PC is because the moment my PS5 copy turned up I got an email saying, "Hey Ben, here's a video game to review, have fun." So if you're new to the series and are only curious about Wonderlands and don't want to use Epic's frankly terrible launcher or want a cheaper bite size of what the game has to offer, then maybe pick up the standalone version of Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep. It's a good starting point. Although personally I imagine you could get the entirety of Borderlands 2 and its DLC for a similar price on sale nowadays, so personally I'd recommend getting that. Originally if you asked me what my favourite Borderlands game was, I would have either said 2 or the pre-sequel. But after today, I think easily Wonderlands is my favourite game in the series, because it has quite a rich story to it and the characters are real. Nah, it's not that really. It's got skeletons.